Hi guys, Sean here from DigiDirect. Today we're going to be checking out the new Sony RX100 Mark V. Now, the RX100 line of compact cameras from Sony has been around for a while, as evidenced by the fact that we're on the fifth one. And they've been consistently among the most popular of the kind of high-end compact cameras. They're a very popular lineup of cameras. And the main reason for that is because they're obviously small, like any regular compact, but they also are very high quality in terms of their picture quality, in terms of the brightness of their lens and their low light performance for a compact. They have a lot of high-end features. Now, the Mark V is no difference here. They do add obviously some new features in here. Primarily, they're focusing on improved autofocus, higher shooting frame rates, and more in the Mark V. We'll get to all of that, but first let's start with a look at the physical body. So if you've seen one of the RX100 series cameras, basically you've seen them all because they're almost identical in terms of their physical design. The main thing here is the size. It's a very compact camera. You can slip it in your jacket pocket and you won't have any issues with that. So that's the main factor. We do have a flip-up LCD screen here, and it's got some extra tilt available as well to be a little bit more flexible. We have a pop-up flash that you can kind of angle a little bit depending on where you want the flash to point. And we've got a pop-up viewfinder, which is actually quite nice. The viewfinder in this camera is quite large considering the size of the camera. Some other compacts with viewfinders, the viewfinders tend to be quite small, but this one is actually a really nice looking viewfinder. Now in the front, we've got a fixed non-interchangeable lens like most compacts. You're not going to be swapping lenses on this, obviously. It does have a zoom range of 28 to 70 millimeters in terms of full frame equivalent, which is not bad. It's not a huge range. You'll see a lot of smaller, cheaper compacts have 20 times, 30 times zoom ranges. The reason for that is the larger the sensor, the less zoom range you'll get, and the RX100 has quite a large sensor. We'll touch on that in a minute, but 28 to 70 is still not bad. To be honest, I shoot probably, I would say 90% of the photo and videos that I shoot are within that range. One really nice feature about the lens is that it's quite bright. It's got a very fast aperture. When fully zoomed out, it's a 1.8 aperture, so very, very bright. And when you zoom in all the way, it still is only 2.8, so still fairly bright even when fully zoomed in. That's going to help you with low light shooting, and it's even going to give you a little bit of shallow depth of field, which you won't see on most compacts, certainly. We've got a control dial at the back, and the second control ring is actually this ring around the lens here. So let's start with the sensor here real quick. So I alluded to this already when I was talking about the zoom range. So this is a very large sensor for a compact camera. It's a 1-inch sensor. Now that is still smaller than something like a Micro Four Thirds or APS-C size sensor, but for compact camera that's very large. It's a lot bigger than most compacts. What that means is you'll get a lot higher picture quality out of the RX100 Mark V, and it'll also be a lot better in low light. This is going to be miles better picture quality than any kind of, $200, $300, $400 compact camera. And that's the big advantage of the RX100 Mark V. It's also a very high resolution sensor. So it's a 20 megapixel sensor. Compared to, for example, most DSLRs tend to fall around the 20 to 24 megapixel range. So this is getting quite up there, certainly for a compact. So photos that you take on this camera will be no problem to print out and blow up fairly large. You'll be able to crop in quite a bit on them. You'll have a lot of resolution to play around with. Okay, so let's start talking about some of the features that are new in the Mark V versus the other RX100 series cameras. The first one is going to be autofocus. Now, Sony has really been pushing the bar with autofocus with their cameras recently. Their a6000 has been a long standard of a fast autofocusing camera. They bumped it up with the a6300, and they've just also released the a6500. So they've got some cameras that have really, really fast autofocus, and they've started to put that technology into the RX100 here in the Mark V. So the Mark V has 315 phase detect autofocus points. So a lot of autofocus points, obviously, which will help with accuracy, and the fact that they're phase detect will mean that they're very fast, very accurate. This is, I believe, one of the first compact cameras to have phase detect autofocus points. There's a bunch of different types of autofocus points, not all are created equal. Phase detect is a very, very good form of autofocus, very accurate, very fast. In particular, tracking moving subjects is very, very strong in the Mark V here. The autofocus improvements obviously affect all of the aspects of autofocus, but the continuous autofocus for movement is where we really see the most advantage. That's going to be great for, maybe you're shooting kids running around, some kind of sports game, you're out on a trip, you're shooting wildlife or nature, animals, anything where there's movement, the autofocus on this is going to be really, really good for that. Now, tying into that fast autofocus, another area of major improvement in the Mark V is the burst shooting. So the RX100 Mark V can now shoot up to 24 frames per second. So that's That's quite a lot of shots. That's basically the same frame rate as video, although you're shooting full RAW photos. It also has an increased buffer. It can shoot up to 170 JPEGs at this speed, or about 60 RAWs. So check this out. Okay, so quite a large buffer of really high-speed shooting. Should also be mentioned that as a new feature on the Mark V, while those photos from the burst mode are still writing to the card, you can actually still view them. Now, in terms of video, the Mark V is certainly also no slouch. It inherits the 4K video capabilities that the Mark IV had, and it has a slew of video-centric features like focus peaking, zebra stripes. It's got an S-Log picture profile, which is a flat picture profile, which is good for color grading. One thing that is a bit different on the Mark V is that the way it captures 4K, it actually captures 5K on the sensor, and then the processor downscales it to 4K. That's a little bit different than the Mark IV. Now, it still outputs it in 4K, so you're still getting 4K video. One could argue that the 5K downscale is a little bit, you capture a little bit more detail. That's a pretty fine tech point, but it is a bit different than the Mark IV in that way. Now, a slightly more noticeable improvement on the Mark V is the rolling shutter. Sony's actually improved this quite a bit in the Mark V versus the Mark IV. It's not eliminated in the Mark V by any means, but it is improved quite a bit. Now, one caveat about the 4K video is that it can only record 4K for up to 5 minutes at a time. So that means you're gonna have to be careful. You're not gonna be able to use it to shoot any kind of long interview type shots. Like for example, what I'm using here where I just set the camera up and leave it running. That's not gonna be really anything you can do on this camera. For travel shots or shooting short takes for a short film or something like that, it'll be fine. But for long takes beyond 5 minutes, you won't be able to do that on the Mark V. Now, another video mode that I really like and think is very cool on this camera is the high frame rate recording mode. And what this is a video mode that lets you shoot at super high frame rates, between 240 and up to 1,000 frames per second. So really high frame rates, which means super slow motion shooting. Now, depending on what frame rate you're shooting at, the quality varies, and the kind of effect you can get with this ultra slow-mo, I think is really cool. It looks really neat. Now, I do have one or two minor gripes with this camera, nothing major, but I'll mention them here. The first and the main one is just the battery life. Because they've crammed so much in here, the autofocus and all these other features, the battery life is actually rated as 20% lower than on the Mark IV. So you will want to have a spare battery with you. You don't want to go out for the day and have the camera die throughout your day. If you have a spare battery, you'll be fine, but bear that in mind, you'll want to get that for sure. And then secondly is just the lack of a touchscreen. Not a big deal, but considering they have all these fancy autofocus points in here, it would be nice if they had touch focus. I'm not going to complain too much about that. It's not that big of a deal, but if it was there, it would have been nice. But other than that, the RX100 Mark V is a super impressive camera. Spec-wise, it's definitely the most impressive compact camera that you're going to find. Picture quality is excellent. If you're looking for the best, highest quality compact camera, you have to look at the RX100 Mark V. I'm not saying it's absolutely the best. There are a couple other competitors in this market, but if you are looking for this kind of camera, you have to at least check out this camera. It's a very good option for the high-end compact range. One other thing I'll quickly mention, Sony is also actually releasing a dive housing for the RX100 series, and that will fit all of the RX100 cameras. So whether you've got the 5 or the 4, or even the 1, it'll fit all the cameras. It'll let you bring the camera up to 40 meters underwater, which is kind of cool. It'll let you take some nice high quality underwater photos. Now, of course, you can come into one of our stores and play around with the RX100 Mark V, give it a test, see what you think, or you can order it on our website at www.digidirect.com.au. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Melbourne and Brisbane CBDs, and a new one in Cannington, Western Australia, just outside of Perth. Thanks, guys. Take care.